I know before you have said that you agree, um, that if like if parents can afford education for their kids, they should still have access to education. But what you believe is you think that the government should just give them the money it would cost for them to basically get like pay for an education, right? That's what you've said before.
Yeah, I believe that the government shouldn't be messing with the demand and supply of the markets. I'm not saying the government should stay out of things. I think that when governments suck at supplying goods and services, but I also acknowledge, as a free market capitalist, I do acknowledge that the markets have their weaknesses. One of the main weaknesses of the market is that it's blind to negative and positive externalities. So, if you read Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, which is the foundation of modern capitalism as we know it, it acknowledges the need for government involvement, especially when it comes to adjustment for positive externalities. So, just this is complicated talk by saying that yes, the government does need to play a role, and when there's a service or a good that provides benefit to the society as a whole, not just the people involved in the trade, then the market is not going to be efficient when it comes to determining how much that good needs to be supplied. So, if something like education benefits the whole society, not just the people who are providing the education and the people who are receiving the education. So it makes sense for the government to come and provide subsidies, not to supply education, because if the government supplies education, it will suck at it. It will hurt the private sector. It will reduce competition, and it will provide services that are not needed. It's not going to be based on what's most profitable and what's the most in demand. It will also be open the door to government brainwashing and stuff like that, right? So instead of doing that, just provide people with subsidies to go spend on education, and that way you're actually improving, increasing the size of the private market, and you're increasing competition because now more people have more money to spend on education. And not only you're increasing education because there's more dollars chasing educational services, you're going to reduce costs, because if you supply education, you increase the cost because government agencies prefer to get bigger and bigger and bigger to justify their costs. But if you actually give people money to spend on education, you bring the prices lower and lower and lower. Why? Because, I mean, it will bring it higher because now more dollars are chasing the education, but that's an increase in price that is justified because people want the education. But it will give you the lowest prices because you have more private suppliers of education having to compete for those dollars. And because they have to compete for those dollars, they compete in quality, but also in price. And that's the best way to bring the prices lower. All right. So, what's your question?
Well, okay, so my fear with that is um right now, like 87% of school age children are in public education in America. My fear is that if we go from like 87% in public education to, let's say, only like 15% of kids are going to school via their parents were given money to pay for their schooling, I'm scared that at that point, what would happen is like schools would open up that basically are being made very cheaply and that the kids who and like we would have a situation where the money being given to families to enroll their kids in school would be just enough money for them to go in the cheapest possible school and the cheapest possible schooling option because only 15% of kids are utilizing it is going to therefore be much worse than the public school system now where 87% of kids utilize it because we would have less interest at that point in having the cheapest possible option be a quality option if only 15% of people are using it as opposed to 87% of people.
I mean, if the public schools are not giving you the skills that will make you more likely to employed, and then now you have more dollars in the private sector and the government is helping with more demand in the private sectors, then these private sector educational services will be motivated not to just give you something cheap and useless, because if it's cheap and useless, then why would you even waste your time going there, right? If they're competing for to convince you to spend your money on them, then they would have to provide you with a service that makes you wanting to buy it. If it's a shitty product, like why? Because remember, you're not just giving them the the money that government give you to spend on them. You're also spending your time on them, time that you could have been working. So if they're giving you something that is not useful at all, then you wouldn't even waste your time on it. So this is the good thing about the private sector. When you provide a service, it needs to be actually something you want, or else you're not going to go with it. You're not going to do it. You're not going to buy it.
But, like, that's the thing, all the like, what if all this what if there's just, I don't know how to phrase this, like, there's only horrible there's
Th-
just horrible options that no one would use if they could afford better.
So first of all, when you have when you have like the current public system, you cannot just end it like that. That would be chaotic. Like, I'm all for privatization, but you cannot just like go on like and just completely cut things off, right? You need to slowly move to this direction. You cannot just cut public funding of something that is already established, like just like willy nilly like that, right? That is like break the fabric of society. But if you are moving off of the addiction to public to the to government public services, goods and services, then if you now have the public one and also the private one, well, the private one has to, if both of them are government funded, one from the supply side and the other one from the demand side, then the one that is being funded from the demand side has to compete with the school or the university that the government is running itself, or from the supply side. So it needs to actually provide a service. So if both of them ends up costing you, like, let's say $0, for example, to a family, to somebody who wants free education, like, so these are two. Let's say, for example, like in a country that you have two types of you have education, in the sense that the government is supplying it, and you want to move to a free education, then the private sector is supplying it, right? If you start going slowly towards the private sector and you're just subsidizing that, then the private sector needs to steal kids from parents, or, I don't know, university students who are considering the public universities. To be able to do that, it cannot just reduce the prices, because the prices on both sides are zero anyways. It needs to convince people to choose it by providing better services. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you have to actually offer something that is worth spending time on.
Okay, Guy wants to tell us about his wife's job.
Hey everyone, thank you for introducing it that way, Danny. And also, hi everyone. Like, it's been a while since I was able to come on for various reasons, but I'm very happy to be back. And
Hey.
Monday is still on, assuming they get my internet fixed tomorrow, which they should. Monday's live stream, the Q&A, is still very much on. So my wife happens to be an education researcher, policy advocate, specifically advocating for this very policy. So here's the thing. The amount of money spent, student, at least in Israel, but I assume it's the same in the United States, by the taxpayer is insane. And the claim isn't, oh, let's save taxpayer money by lowering the price, but instead it's, let's take the same amount of money per student, literally give it to the student, meaning give it to the parents to choose. It's called the voucher system, to what school they're going to send their kids, and the schools get a funding based on the number of students they have. And that causes so it's not that not enough money would be allowed per student. It's just going to allow, because it's directly given to the schools, it allows schools to have way more of a budget for both teacher salaries and for amenities than what you can have in a sorry, 1 second. Okay. than what you can have in the current system, which is highly, highly, highly dysfunctional and inefficient. And what this allows is, first of all, if there are bad schools, no one's going to go to them. Second of all, you're not locked in based on your postal code. Like you're not locked in just, I was born in a bad neighborhood that has very low funding by the government, and therefore the public school in that neighborhood also has very low funding. And so I'm going to have a shitty school, and I'm going to perpetuate my family's economic problems. So this actually allows for better social mobility, because if there's a good school in a reasonable distance from you, then you can go to it. And because every student is worth so much money to the schools will make it's worthwhile to collect kids, like have busing from relatively remote locations, just because again, I can't stress enough how insane the amount of spending per student is. It's just that because it's so inefficient, it never gets to the actual quality of the education. So you're and by the way, it's not necessarily, you don't even have to close any schools. You can use all the same schools. It's all like the public system and private system would be essentially the same. It's just that the public schools will be like, every school would get differentiated funding based on the number of students that choose to go to it. And so you can still have the public schools. If they're good schools, if people want to go to them, they will continue going to them. And the schools just have way more of a budget, because there will be way less intermediaries like collecting paychecks and rent seeking between the student and the quality of their education. Also between the teacher and their salary, by the way. The teacher salaries will be able to be much higher if you can do that. And you can just have a state subsidized service that is made to be as efficient as possible, as opposed to pay as many salaries as possible to people who don't really do much. And if you want an example of this kind of system at work, you can look at Israel's health system, which is by and large considered one of the best in the world, which operates based on this very principle of vouchers. So each citizen in Israel is like, there are 4 co-ops vying for each person, and they get funded based on the number of people who choose them. And so they act like private companies, but healthcare in Israel is relatively cheap, and it's not as good as private healthcare in the States, but for what you're paying, it's insanely effective. And this kind of system for education can work just as well, if not probably more so, because of the different systems under that the education has to go through that are actually more layered in terms of like the number of intermediaries you have to go through between the decision or the funding and the person who's supposed to be benefiting from that funding.
All right, thank you, Guy. Let's go on to Jeffrey.
Jeffrey, are you there?
Yeah, I don't know what the hell's going on with my camera. Forgive me. Yeah, so it's actually a really cool question and or public policy issue. Actually, I want to thank you, Samantha, for bringing it up, and for Guy and Armin, and with your responses. There is obviously market imperfections, right? So there's role for government intervention. Where there's a market imperfection, defined as a public need but no market niche. A good example that would be vaccines. A dynamic learning curve or first mover advantage. A lot of that is like, what's a good example of a dynamic learning curve or first mover advantage? So the point is that private firms will often wait or underinvest. It's like, so dynamic learning curve first mover advantage is about increasing returns over time. And the problem is, who pays for the learning, right? So the early investment is expensive and risky. Later entrances can kind of copy the technology knowledge and at a lower cost or free ride. And so private firms, therefore, might often wait or underinvest, hoping somebody else does it. And society as a whole benefits from the cost reductions and the productivity gains that come along the moving down the learning curve, right? That's very much an efficiency approach towards expanding availability of things that, like, people who are at lower socioeconomic niches. That's not the same as communism or socialism. The other additional requirements are that the public sector can fix the problem, right? Meaningfully improve the problem. So the government has the capacity, information, institutional ability to intervene effectively. The benefits outweigh the costs, and that means you have to do rigorous cost benefit analysis, including long-term dynamic effects and productivity growth, avoidment, future costs, and spillovers, and mission creep, and all this other shit I don't want to go through, so I'll make me sterile. Right? You have intervention has to be structured in investment in productivity, not just consumption or redistribution, and that's the problem with a lot of with communism and socialism. It very much focuses on equity, which is subjectively defined and perceived, or in their case, misperceived to be the redistribution of something, right? So it's not like the idea of expanding goods to people is not an ennoble goal. And there is definitely a role for the public sector to be involved. It's just not accurately defined how commies or socialists misrepresent what that role should be. I think that, what Guy had said, he very much touched on a lot of that. Even if you do a top-down approach, because me and Armin, we differ on that, that's okay. Right? There's probably a good argument for a mix of both. Still, those overall caveats exist. Right? Marxist, communist, Maoist, all those fuckers, all they do is co-opt a problem and present that as their, very superficially, as a means to try to justify their redistributing stuff when they have no idea what they're doing or care. Like, they don't care. Like, Marx was simultaneously the world's worst sociologist, historian, and economist, probably in human history. He should have stayed out eating his lunch underneath the snuffleupagus, right? I don't know. I very much appreciate the question. Thanks for the comments. I just wanted to add the issue of market imperfections and some of the things you might want to think about, well, a lot of economists think about when they think about how to resolve them and where public sector might play a role.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Monkey is next, and let's try to speed up so that we can get to the topics.
All right, I'll try to be fast. They spend about $17,600 per student, K through 12. In fourth grade, in reading, they're 31% proficient, which is not very proficient. In math, 36% proficient. That's fourth grade. Eighth grade, 31% proficient in reading, 26 in math. So it's going down in math. This is your public schools. This is $17,600 a year per student. In 12th grade, these are graduating students going off to college, 37% proficient in reading. You should be able to read well when you leave for college. You can't. 24% proficient in math. All right. This is very important because it's like, oh, we got to save the public schools. Are they helping, or is this just another fraud scheme? Because they seem to be doing a lot of things that have nothing to do with school. Another problem that is being had is that a lot of this funding is also going to the schools for something like general grants for counseling and safety programs. LGBT students are protected and they have special funding. So what you have is, to get more funding, you want the impetus to be, hey, my school teaches better, right? So let me have your fund, have your voucher come here. You're not never going to get the cash, right? The voucher goes to the school you send your kids. Well, send your voucher here because I give your kids more results. Because right now, what's giving the kids more funding is having more kids that have autism, more kids that have ADHD. So you wind up with, teachers that recommend, hey, if you have a problem child, just send them to ADHD counseling, and maybe we get them on some medicine, and we get a little bit more money per district. This is how incentive works on the top down side, where you have overdiagnosis because of problems in school. And we all know, anybody that knows anything about this, a lot of young kids get put on these psychotropics because they get labeled problem children by the schools. And just overall political type funding. Why do they do this? Because they get better salaries, they get better, facilities, if not salaries. And this is a problem. Top down creates the wrong kind of incentive. Bottom up creates the right type of incentive, because these vouchers have to compete. If I want the vouchers to come to my school, well, my kids are going to have to graduate, because it's no longer about what diagnosis they have. It's about what results the parents are seeing.
All right. Let's go to next person, Jose.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. Monkey and Jeff are not wrong. Here in Florida, we have a voucher system where parents, there are multiple systems. One, you can start paying into a fund to build up college fund for your kid, starting when pretty much they're born. You register them, they get a social security card, bang, 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 there's a voucher system. My niece went to the University of Tampa on that voucher system. She also qualified for a scholarship to that school as well. So she could actually pay at a part-time job, pay for a university degree of $30,000 a year school. Okay, so it can be done. Now, did she go to public school? I did, my sister did, my brother did. We turned out okay, but the system was different then. I can write in cursive. Nowadays, good luck. I can read complex books. Good luck. I can do math, calculating the speed between the Earth and how far the moon is drifting away from the Earth back when I was actually studying that kind of shit. I could do that kind of math. I can do incredible financial work now. Okay. What's graduating out of the public school system, I don't even know how they're getting to graduate, except that their numbers being pushed out the door. I cannot explain it. I cannot explain it. I can see people coming in and working where I work, and we have over 500 applicants for 2 positions, and we're looking at another 500 applicants because not a single one could do the simple math problem we put before them. So it's systemic. If we start receiving people that went through a magnet school, and those vouchers go to magnet schools, so they can learn how to go into law enforcement, so they can learn how to fix cars if they want. There's a lot of those type of magnet schools around where the vouchers work for as well as Catholic schools. And God, I forget what they're called. But anyway, there are other magnet programs out there that do things. And some of our high schools have been switched from general high schools to magnet schools of some kind. So that's how it's done. In college, there's something called a Pell Grant that the United States government will give to a student that you don't have to pay back. Problem is, you have to make under a certain amount of money. If you're living at home, your parents have to make a certain amount of money, and it's rarely used. It is used, but it's rarely successfully applied for. So the money's there. It's whether you're going to take advantage of the system or not and get to use it or not. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Jose. Let's go to Jilly.
Short. Oh, Jelly. Thank you. Kelly, are you here?
No, I always have to give my computer permission to allow me to speak, and it takes a few seconds.
That's okay.
Look, Samantha, and Armin, everybody, hi. I come from a country where we have a mixed system. And I think it works. It's one of the few things that generally works very well. Even though I have some arguments with some of the ideologies that have got into all schools at the moment, some of the left-wing ideologies that they're teaching children rather than education, and that's a problem with many schools, private and public. The country I live in is very large. There are sections of the country that the private sector simply will not cover. There are places that are so sparsely populated that the private sector will not cover it, and there are spaces where traditional Indigenous people live who haven't had a history of education, formalized education. They have their own education systems which were based on traditional practices, but they didn't have formalized education. These areas would not be covered by the private sector. And so what's developed in this country is a mixed system. And the public system is what they call nominally free. Obviously, it's paid for out of your taxation. And it is generally, I'm not saying in every case, but is generally of a slightly lower standard than what you would get in the private system. The government also pays a subsidy for every child who's in the private school system, and that subsidy is paid to the school based on their per head of children. And sometimes there's an outcry here by people on the left who say, we shouldn't be paying for private schools. But in fact, what every child in a private school is a child that is not being paid for by the taxpayer in a public school. That's a child that's getting what turns out to be a better education. In the case of education, I don't advocate for this in everything. I advocate generally for less government involvement in most things. But in this case, you have a situation that brings private schools down to a level that, for many of them, not all of them, is more affordable for most people. If they are if they are ideologically predisposed to take that option. The other thing about the private schools is that private schools can set, as long as they meet a certain basic educational minimum, they can actually teach a different set of values to a child. Most of our private schools are religious based, but my children, for example, went to Jewish schools. And that meant they got an education that encompassed certain Jewish values as well as the basics, right? So it's one case where I think that a mixed system of public and private is really good, because the public school scrapes up the children who otherwise wouldn't be served, and the private system creates some options, and it actually costs the taxpayer a lot less overall, because per head of child it costs less to the government to pay the small subsidy they pay to private schools than it costs to actually have a child in a public school. So that's my contribution. But unlike other things, some other things, I don't agree with you about overall, about withdrawing, about making the government responsible for healthcare in the way that I suspect you may be advocating, but that's just an aside. But in this case, I like
like we need to keep it short because we're running out of time.
Sorry.
But I think you misunderstood me. I don't think the government should provide healthcare. And I think like it's fundamentally wrong to assume that the government providing education will be cheaper. It will never be cheaper. Government providing education itself will always be more expensive than letting the private sector take care of it and just providing subsidies to the students itself, because it's just the basic laws of economics. And when you have more competition, things will get more affordable. And saying that we need government, I don't saying the government needs to be involved too, so that everybody gets a chance to education. Like, what that's the whole point of the subsidies. And when you have private companies compete with each other, the prices will always be lower than when you have the government model. Always, that will bring the prices lower, as long as you allow people to compete with each other in fully. And also, having the public sector and the private sector at the same time providing education is a horrible idea, because it's unfair to the private sector to have to compete with the institutions that don't have to reduce costs. Like, that destroys the private sector. That reduces, like, in fact, if you like when you have both the private and the public sector, both the government providing a service and the private sector providing the service, and if you don't come judge, like, oh, let me see which one is better, that is a flawed way to compete, to compare which one works, because the private sector works when it doesn't have a government to compete with. So looking at a country that has both and say, like, oh, well, the private sector failed here, so compared to the public sector, like, this is actually what the public sector is better at. That doesn't make any sense, because the private sector will display how good it is when it doesn't have to deal with the giant government competing with it. So that's my view. But like, we need to really move on to the next topic, so let's not do any twos anymore, because Nets hasn't been speaking at all, and for the first time he actually put a one here, and I've been waiting to see what he has to say. So let's move on to, oh, actually, let me read the super chats really quickly before we go to Nets. So Fleshy Interloper, thank you so much for the super chat. Say, who supplied the 4,000 kilometer range missiles? Oh, so the Islamic Republic managed to get to 4,000 kilometers by just reducing the weight on the, let me see, like, it wasn't a big, so the only thing they did, they didn't build a new missile. It's the same as the Khorramshahr ballistic missiles that they had before. They just removed a whole bunch of components from it, making it a lot lighter. So it's the same missiles that they had before, and it managed to go to 4,000 because of the reduction of weight. It wasn't a new missile or anything like that, right? So that's my understanding. And Jeffrey is nodding his head, so he agrees. And then thank you Fleshy for the super chat. And then a Selectivist with another super chat saying, Sam Harris, 1, Trump is a no-no, 2, Dems would be Dems would have been. So Sam, you're saying Sam Harris is saying Trump is definitely a no-no, but Sam Harris also is saying that the Democrats would have been terrible in Israel and Iran, and they're too woke. 3, doesn't regret voting for Kamala. Fucking bunkers. Yeah, I mean, given that Sam Harris admits that the Democrats would be worse than Trump for Israel, so I don't know why he voted for Kamala. That I don't know how he justifies that. That's a good point, actually. Zip Gun with a super chat saying the last resort for children's needs, food, health, education, etc., is the responsibility of the state. Since those children are citizens, this can is hijacked to indoctrinate. Oh, okay. So I'm not sure what you're saying here, but if you're saying if we give the state, so here we have to always be worried about the indoctrination from the state and also in the indoctrination from the parents. I think the best result is, yeah, I agree that the state has to take care of children, they're citizens and they're vulnerable, and you cannot always trust the parents not to abuse or harm or to brainwash children. But if you give it to the government fully to take care of them, the government will actually brainwash them instead of the parents. So I think what you have to do is you have to have the private sector, but you also have to have government involvement checking in on the health and the education of the children and making sure, even if you have a private sector providing education, I do believe in making sure that the government is setting a minimum standard that every child should meet, and any parent that is not educating their children should be punished, or somehow, like, the government needs to somehow be involved in making sure that the children are getting the basic skills they need to be competitive, to be able to compete in the labor market. So I do agree with that. And Zipgun with a super chat saying vouchers can have the same problem if the schools are willing to kick back money to the parents. Oh yeah, when it comes to, okay, I think this is resembling the food stamp fraud that we were talking about. Yeah, okay. And thank you, Zipgun, for the super chats. My name is Armin Navabi. I'm an Iranian political analyst with decades of experience fighting the Islamic regime inside and outside of Iran. Make sure you follow me for more, and also make sure you join our discussion group. I'm there almost every single day. Come talk to me there and the rest of the people there in our group calls. It's a great place to meet and talk to people who like talking about politics. The link is in the description and or in the bio. You could also get there by scanning the QR code on the screen. See you there.